The rain came down in sheets the night Nia went into labor. Thick, unrelenting and without warning. The kind of storm that made the road vanish in minutes, that made headlights blur and tires skid and the world shrink into the trembling shape of whatever was directly in front of you. She'd known the baby was coming for hours, the tightening in her lower back, the fluttering cramps, the pressure like a tide pulling her body inward. But she'd been alone when it started. Her mother had died 2 winters ago and her partner, Ade, had left 3 days before after another one of their silences turned into something sharp. She had called him, of course. Twice. Then a third time. No answer. By the time she reached the rural hospital outside Oworo, her contractions were 5 minutes apart and her face was slick with sweat and water. Her dress clung to her. Her shoes were caked in red mud. The taxi driver who dropped her off didn't wait to be paid. He just sped off into the storm again, the tires spitting stones behind him. Inside, the reception area was lit by flickering bulbs, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite cover something metallic, something sour. A nurse, thin, bored, her name tag swinging from her chest, glanced up, saw the pain in Nia's face and called for a gurney. Nia was wheeled down a narrow hall, past curtained bays and half-closed doors, into a delivery room that looked like it hadn't been painted in a decade. The walls were stained yellow near the vents. The sheets were stiff. The doctor on call was an older man, gray-bearded, who barely spoke. He nodded once when he entered, pulled on gloves, and began checking her dilation with the efficiency of someone who'd already checked out. The labor was long. 13 hours of pain. No epidural. No gentle words. Just Nia, her screams swallowed by the storm outside, and the occasional grunted instructions from the nurse. Push. Again. Harder. The baby came just after dawn, when the rain had lessened to a steady tapping. The windows were fogged over. Nia felt the pressure, then release and then silence. No cry. Her head snapped up. She could barely see, the sweat blurred her eyes, but she saw the nurse lean in, lift the baby, swaddle it quickly. No words. No sound. The doctor said nothing. Let me see, Nia gasped. They ignored her. Let me see my baby. Still nothing. The nurse moved swiftly, body blocking Nia's view. The doctor murmured something to her. Then louder, the baby didn't make it. I'm sorry. Nia screamed. Not from pain. From something deeper, something hollowed and splitting and ancient. She tried to sit up, tried to reach, but her body collapsed backward. Her arms felt like they were made of soaked wood. Her legs wouldn't move. Where is she? Let me hold her, she begged. The nurse turned away. The doctor made a note on a clipboard. You can rest now, someone said, though she couldn't tell who. No, Nia whispered. No, please. Then a sharp prick in her arm. A needle. Darkness. When she woke again, the room was brighter. The storm had passed. Outside the window, the trees were still soaked but steady. She was alone. A folded paper was placed on the metal table beside her. A death certificate, already signed. No name. Just female, stillborn. She cried until her body ached more than it had during the birth. She cried until her throat was raw and no one came. The nurse returned only once to remove her and tell her she'd be discharged that evening. I never saw her, Nia said. The nurse didn't answer. Why didn't she cry? I'm sorry for your loss, was the flat reply. Where's her body? There was no need to burden you with it, the nurse said and left. By the time Nia got home, a black emptiness had settled in her chest like cold stone. Ade was nowhere to be found. She sat alone on the edge of her bed, her arms wrapped around her empty stomach, and stared at the spot on the wall where sunlight used to land every morning. It never looked warm again. The neighbors came. They brought food. A few left candles. Some whispered prayers at the gate. No one asked too many questions. No one wanted to dig. 1 week passed. Then another. When she called the hospital for more information, she was told the file was sealed. A clerical matter, they said. When she asked for her daughter's remains, they told her it had already been handled, that the body had been buried in the hospital's infant lot. No marker. No photo. No confirmation. Ade came back briefly days later, face pale, mouth full of apologies that tasted sour in the air. He couldn't explain why he hadn't answered her calls, only that he wasn't ready to be a father. He left again the next morning. Nia tried to move on. She started going to church again. She tried to forgive herself. She told herself it had happened, the baby had been born dead, that there was nothing she could have done. But something in her heart refused to settle. She began having dreams. In them, she stood at the hospital doors, banging and screaming, but no one heard. Other times she was holding a warm, breathing baby, only for it to vanish from her arms like mist. She met with a counselor once. The woman had kind eyes and soft words. But when Nia told her she never saw the body, the counselor's face tensed slightly. "You may be in denial," she said gently. "That's normal. Grief plays tricks." But it didn't feel like a trick. Felt like a theft. On what would have been her daughter's first birthday, Nia lit a candle in the window and whispered the name she had chosen, Amara. It meant grace, and she repeated it like a prayer. She whispered it every year. As the seasons passed, she moved to another town, started teaching primary school. Children had always comforted her, even if every child's laugh cut just slightly across her soul. She kept to herself. She never told the new neighbors about the baby. She never married. She never bore another child. But each year on the same day she lit the candle. Sometimes 2. Sometimes 3. Her home filled with waxy smoke and the soft hum of a lullaby only she remembered. And every time she walked past a girl with eyes a little too wide or a voice that lilted just so, she wondered. Her friends told her to let go. The church told her to trust God's will. The world told her it was time to move on. But something deeper, older, buried but alive, told her to keep remembering. Because her daughter had never cried. Because the nurse had never looked her in the eye. Because nothing truly dies in silence. And because, even after all these years, Nia swore she could still feel the warmth of small fingers that had once curled inside her, even if only for a moment. She hadn't let go. She couldn't. Not when she'd never been allowed to hold her. It was a Tuesday morning when the first whisper reached her. Nia had gone to town for fabric, just something light to sew into new curtains. The old ones reminded her too much of the house she'd been in before. Before the storm. Before the birth. Before silence became the only thing that answered her. She moved slowly through the market, letting the sounds wash over her. Children bargaining, radios humming, a distant preacher shouting. It felt almost like life. Almost. At the back of the stall where she found the fabric, a woman sat weaving bright strands of thread into a pattern that resembled a cradle. They exchanged quiet greetings. The woman asked if Nia had children. Nia by then had practiced her response too well. "No," she said. "Not anymore." The woman tilted her head. Her hands slowed. "Was it the hospital up by the river?" she asked softly. Nia blinked. "Yes." "Did they let you hold the child?" Nia's throat tightened. She shook her head. The woman looked down, then said nothing more. But something had shifted in that moment. Something cold and familiar. Later that day, Nia returned to the market and asked the stall owner about the weaver. He hesitated, then told her the woman had lost a baby 2 years earlier. A stillbirth, he said. No burial. No pictures. No goodbyes. She never really got over it, he added as if that explained everything. Nia thanked him and walked away, but her legs were shaking. That night, she lay awake thinking about the woman's question. Did they let you hold the child? She remembered every second of that night again, not as memories, but as bruises that hadn't faded. The paper they gave her. The nurse's silence. The body she never saw. She tried to sleep, but dreams came, dreams of a corridor that never ended, filled with crying babies behind doors she couldn't open. She woke before dawn, heart pounding. The next week, she went to a church gathering meant for women who had lost children. It wasn't something she'd normally attend, but the market woman would be there, and Nia couldn't let the question go. The group met in a circle beneath a tamarind tree. Women introduced themselves with quiet pain. One spoke of a fever that took her son. Another of a snake bite. But three of them, told stories that echoed Nia's own. I was told he didn't make it. But he kicked until the last moment, one said. They told me it was for the best. That he was deformed. But they wouldn't let me see him, another whispered. My husband wasn't even there. When I woke up they told me she was gone. I still dream of her, the third said, holding a worn shawl. Nia's mouth went dry. She didn't speak that day. But her heart screamed. Later she approached them gently, asked about their births. One of them, a quiet woman named Selu, asked which hospital Nia had gone to. Nia told her. Selu's face darkened. Same, she said. How long ago? Nia asked. 6 years. Did they show you? No. Selu looked over her shoulder before leaning closer. There are more. I've met 4 other women. All same story. Same hospital. Same night staff. Same lies. Nia felt something cold crack open in her chest. They began to meet quietly every few weeks. They compared timelines, names, details. Patterns emerged. It was always the same 2 doctors. The same head nurse. Deliveries at night. Limited access to birth records. No funerals. No death certificates that made sense. One woman claimed she saw a nurse leaving with a bundled child an hour after being told hers had died. Another said she returned to the hospital to demand her baby's body and was told there was no record she'd even given birth. It was more than a mistake. It was a system. A pattern of vanishing. A year after her own birth trauma, Nia could no longer stay quiet. She decided to file a formal complaint. She returned to the hospital, her hands trembling as she handed the form to the receptionist. The woman behind the glass didn't even look at it. "Wait here," she said. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, a short man in a suit appeared and ushered Nia into a small, unmarked office. He asked her to explain. She did clearly. He said he understood. He took the papers, nodded, and promised the hospital board would investigate. "You'll hear from us," he said. She never did. 2 months passed. Nothing. When she returned to follow up, the staff claimed to have no record of the complaint. When she asked for the man in the suit, they said no one by that name worked there. The desk where she'd handed the form to the receptionist now had a different person. A younger nurse, tired eyes, slightly kind. Nia leaned in. "Please," she said. "I lost my child here. Something isn't right." The nurse looked around, then lowered her voice. "Don't talk about it here." "Why?" "They don't like women who ask questions." Nia's stomach dropped. "Who's they?" The nurse hesitated. "People who move children like coins. People with power. They have names that sit above ours. Just leave it, ma'am. Go home." But Nia didn't go home. She stood in the hospital parking lot for a long time, staring at the building's faded paint and dark windows. She tried to remember the face of the nurse from that night. She tried to recall the sound of her daughter's breath, but there had been none. Only silence. And a closing door. She walked past the infant lot behind the hospital, where they said her daughter was buried. It was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no markers. Just grass, patchy and unkept. She counted 17 graves. The records she'd seen listed over 50 infant deaths in the past 5 years. Where were the rest? She knelt, touched the soil, and whispered the name she had not spoken aloud in months. Amara. And for a moment, just a breath, the wind shifted and the leaves rattled as if in answer. The next day, Nia tried to get a copy of her daughter's birth record from the district office. But the file had been archived, they said. Then sealed. When she asked who sealed it, they couldn't say. When she demanded to know why, they told her it was hospital policy. When she raised her voice, the clerk behind the desk simply stood and walked away. That night, she sat in her kitchen with a notebook open and began writing names. Cello. Ideal. The Weaver. 3 more names she barely remembered. She started sketching timelines. Charts. Birth dates. Names of doctors. Nurses. She became a student of her own pain. And with each note she made, her suspicion hardened into certainty. Someone had taken her baby. And they had done it before. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know why. But the lie was wide and old. And it wasn't just her. It wasn't just loss. It was theft. One night, Selu called her in a panic. "I went back to ask again. They told me I never gave birth." "What?" "They said I was admitted for stomach cramps. They erased everything." Nia's hands shook. "They're covering it," Selu whispered. "They're closing the walls around it." Nia stared at her wall, where she had pinned a photo of herself from the day she learned she was pregnant. Her smile in the picture looked so different from who she was now. Younger. Softer. Still believing the world followed rules. She didn't cry that night. She wrote more names. And for the first time since that cursed delivery room, Nia didn't feel alone in the dark. She was angry. She was scared. But she was not alone. There were others. And maybe, just maybe, there were answers waiting beyond the silence. Ask ChatGPT. The air always felt heavier in late July. It wasn't just the heat, though that too clung like cloth dipped in honey, but the weight of something unseen, something Nia couldn't name out loud. It had been nearly 3 years since the birth, since the stillness, since the paper marked "female, stillborn," had been placed beside her hospital bed like an afterthought. But the memory hadn't faded. If anything, it sharpened with time, like glass beneath her feet, always waiting when she thought the ground was clear. She moved towns 6 months after the investigation attempt failed. The nurse's warning, "They don't like women who ask questions," had echoed in her bones. Something about the hospital, about the silence, had wrapped around her life like roots. She'd felt it each time she went out. In the way her old neighbors avoided her. in the way her own name seemed to hover in conversations behind closed doors. So she left. The new town was quiet, built along a riverbank where people still grew cassava in their backyards and children rode rusted bicycles through the alleys. It was the kind of place where newcomers were noticed but not questioned, especially if they kept to themselves. And Nia was good at that now, keeping herself to herself. She took a job at the local primary school. Teaching had always lived in the corner of her heart, and now it became her daily rhythm. Her voice, once raw from grief, smoothed over the years into something calm, gentle, steady. Children liked her. They trusted her. They sat a little closer when she read aloud, and even the most stubborn boys quieted when she raised a brow. She found comfort in the patterns of school days. Morning bell, warm greetings, chalk on blackboard, recess laughter, tiny pencils gripped in determined hands. It was a world she could shape, a place where things made sense. Most days. But every now and then something would slip. A child would cry in a pitch too familiar. A little girl would look up at her with eyes shaped like almonds, wide and searching, and Nia's breath would catch. A lullaby would slip from her lips without warning, one she didn't even remember learning, and a hush would fall over the classroom. Then she would step outside, hand on her chest, and breathe. There were no photographs of her daughter, no ultrasound image to hold, no name officially recorded. But in her mind, Amara was real. Fully formed. Sometimes tall. Sometimes small. Sometimes with her nose, sometimes with AIDS. In her mind, Amara changed with the seasons, the years. But she never left. Nia kept a journal hidden inside the wooden drawer of her nightstand. Every July she wrote a letter. Dear Amara, she would begin. Then the rest would come, slow and painful. Descriptions of her life. Her fears. Her stubborn belief that something had been taken. That someone knew more. That the hospital had buried more than a child that night. On Amara's 4th birthday, Nia lit a candle and whispered her name 12 times. On her 6th, she folded a small dress out of old cloth and left it by the river. On her 8th, she didn't leave the house at all, just sat with her journal, letting the silence speak. No one in the new town knew this side of her. They saw a quiet, graceful woman. Soft-spoken. Kind. Perhaps a little distant, but reliable. Children's parents praised her. Neighbors nodded in respect. But no one asked about the ring she never wore. Or the child she never brought to school events. Or the way she looked at the full moon with an expression too old for someone her age. Ade never returned. Once, Nia saw a man in a nearby town who looked like him. Same walk, same slouch. But it wasn't him. Or maybe it was and he didn't recognize her. Either way, she let him pass. He had made his choice. Nia had tried to move on. Friends urged her to meet someone. The head teacher once offered to introduce her to a cousin. But she smiled politely and said, "I'm still healing." In truth, she didn't know if healing was even the goal anymore. Some wounds didn't close. They simply became part of the architecture of your soul. She built a garden behind her small home. Tomatoes, peppers, mint, lemongrass. The soil soothed her in ways people couldn't. She'd speak to the plants without meaning to, calling them by pet names, sometimes even singing. The neighbors thought it charming. She never explained that it was practice. Practice for the daughter she still imagined might one day return. Some nights, the wind carried strange sounds. A crying baby. A woman's laugh. But always faint, always fading. Nia would sit at the window with her candle and watch, feeling as though the air itself was trying to remember something it had once witnessed but could no longer bear to speak aloud. She did try therapy again. This time with a traveling counselor who came to the school. She said only a few words during the session, but the counselor said something that lingered. "You are grieving a ghost," she said, "but sometimes ghosts are what's left when truth is buried too deep." That sentence stayed with Nia. Sometimes she would walk past the school's baby class, watch the toddlers tumbling over building blocks or falling asleep on mats. The ache would rise like a tide, then settle. One day she sat with them just for a moment while their teacher stepped out. A little girl climbed into her lap without a word. She sat there, blinking slowly, then said, "You smell like the moon." Nia froze. "What do you mean?" The girl shrugged. Warm and quiet. The teacher returned. The moment passed. But that night, Nia wrote in her journal, "The world knows. The children still here." When 10 years had passed, Nia returned to the old town just once. The hospital still stood, now with a fresh coat of paint and a new name. No one she knew worked there anymore and she didn't go inside. But she walked past the infant lot again. This time there were more headstones, but they still didn't bear the names of the ones she had learned. No mention of Amara. No truth risen from the soil. She placed a white flower on the grass and whispered, "I didn't forget you. I never will." Then she turned and walked away, her steps steady. There were whispers still. Sometimes they came through unexpected sources. A retired nurse who sent an unsigned letter. A newspaper story about corruption in the health ministry. A mother she once met in passing who showed her a blurry photo of a child she'd never met but couldn't stop dreaming about. But Nia no longer searched actively. She had learned patience. Learned that sometimes truth didn't come when you chased it. Sometimes it found you. In time. In pieces. In echoes. She lived her life like a river stone, weathered, still, with currents passing over her but never washing her away. On Amara's 18th birthday she lit 2 candles. One for the baby she never held. And one for the woman she might be now. She said the name aloud, louder than ever before. Amara. And for a long moment, the wind didn't move, the trees didn't sway, and even the earth beneath her feet seemed to listen. Something was still out there. Waiting. Watching. And maybe, just maybe, on its way home. Asked ChatGPT. It was a Friday, the sky soft and full of clouds, the kind of day that lingers between rain and silence. Nia had almost forgotten what day it was, almost. But the weight had crept into her bones like it always did this time of year. The children were rowdy after lunch, and she had just dismissed them for the weekend, rubbing her temples and staring absently at the chalkboard as the final bell echoed through the schoolyard. The staff courtyard was mostly empty, except for a few teachers chatting about weekend plans. Nia didn't join them. Her thoughts were distant. It was July again. Her daughter's birthday. 18 years. Old enough to vote. To leave home. To speak her own name. Nia walked to the edge of the yard, watching the sky, trying not to cry in public. She had cried enough in the dark, enough into pillows and journals. Today she would just breathe. She had lit her morning candle, whispered the name again, and gone about her day. Just like always. Then, just as she turned to go back inside, she heard the shouts. A murmur at the gate. One of the younger teachers rushed past her, then slowed and said, "Miss Nia, there's someone asking for you." "For me?" Nia blinked. The teacher looked pale. "You should come." At the school gate, a crowd had formed, a cluster of children, a few older students, the groundskeeper and one of the cooks. They all stood around a girl, maybe 17, maybe 18, who stood swaying on her feet, her face dirt-streaked, her lips swollen. She wore a faded green jacket far too large for her, with torn jeans and mismatched shoes. Her hair was matted in places. One hand clutched something tight against her chest. The girl's eyes scanned the space until they landed on Nia. She stepped forward once, wobbled, then steadied herself. Her lips moved. A whisper. No one heard. Then louder. "Mother." The word was not a question. Not hope. Not confusion. Just certainty. Nia froze. Her body went cold. It was as if the world had tilted beneath her. Everyone turned to stare at her, but she didn't see them. She saw the girl's face. Her eyes, wide, almond-shaped. Her cheekbones. That nose. The curve of her mouth. It was like looking into a mirror of memory. The girl stepped forward again, pulling her hand away from her chest. In it, she held a photograph, worn, crumpled, but unmistakably real. Nia recognized it instantly. A picture of herself, taken 18 years ago. She had been pregnant in it, standing barefoot by the cassava patch, smiling into the camera, one hand on her belly. She had never given that photo to anyone. Where did you get that?" Nia asked, her voice trembling. But the girl didn't answer. She swayed again. Then, without another word, she collapsed. Gasps echoed. The cook rushed forward. Nia dropped to her knees. The girl's head lolled. Her eyes were open but distant, as if the world around her had vanished. She was burning with fever. Bruises lined her wrists, and there was a cut at the base of her neck, half-healed. "Get water," Nia said sharply. "Call the clinic." They lifted her gently and carried her inside into the nurse's office. The local nurse arrived within minutes, surprised by the girl's state and even more by Nia's expression. "She just showed up?" the nurse asked, dabbing the girl's forehead. "Yes," Nia said. "And she called you?" "She called me her mother." The nurse looked up sharply. "Is she?" "I don't know." But even as she said it, part of her already knew. Later that evening, when the girl had been cleaned and bandaged and left to rest on the cot, Nia sat beside her, watching. The photograph was still in her hand. She hadn't let it go, even unconscious. Nia gently pried it free and stared at it again. There was no writing on the back. Just the image, faded but vivid in its intimacy. A knock on the office door startled her. It was the groundskeeper holding a small bag. She had this in her pocket, he said. Didn't know if it matters. Inside the bag were a few coins, a folded scrap of paper with bus routes scrawled on it, and a worn ribbon, the kind used for tying a baby's wrist in old traditions. It had the name Amara stitched in thread. Nia sat down slowly. The name had never been registered. She had whispered it only in the quiet. She had written it in her journals, never allowed in public. Never filed. Never spoken to the world. How could this girl know it? The girl stirred that night around 3 a.m. Nia had dozed off in the chair, but the sound of rustling pulled her awake. She sat up quickly. The girl blinked at her. Her voice was hoarse. You're real. Nia reached forward. Who are you? I don't know, not all of it. I was in a place. A house. With other girls. We never used names. Who gave you that picture? A woman. She was sick. She said she knew where I came from. She had a box. The picture was in it. Did she say my name? The girl shook her head. She said my name was Amara. She said, you cried. Nia swallowed hard. What else do you remember? Lights. Men. Being moved a lot. Some kind people. Some bad ones. I ran. I found a bus. She looked around. This place smells like you. Nia couldn't speak. Her throat had closed. She reached forward and took the girl's hand. It was smaller than she expected. Delicate. Are you her? She whispered. I don't know, the girl said. But her eyes answered. In the days that followed, Nia kept her home from school, calling in sick herself. They didn't talk about what came next. Not yet. They moved slowly. Nia cooked meals. Amara sat by the window. They didn't say mother or daughter again. They didn't need to. There were moments. Small aching ones. Amara would touch the hem of Nia's dress while she stirred stew. Nia would brush the tangles from Amara's hair without speaking. At night, Nia lit 2 candles now. One for the lost child. One for the returned stranger. The clinic took blood samples. Paperwork was filed. But results took time. In the meantime, Nia began to write again. Not just in her journal, but letters. To the other mothers. To the press. To the ministry. She no longer cared who they were. They had taken something. But now something had returned. And her name was Amara. The morning Amara finally spoke of House 37, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled around the mug of warm tea. She had been quiet for days, almost unusually so. But something had shifted, a kind of clarity or maybe resolve. It wasn't always called that, she said. They had other names. But that's what the girls called it. House 37. Nia looked up from the notepad where she had been quietly journaling their mornings. Where was it? I don't know, Amara said. We were always moved at night. Sometimes in vans with no windows. I tried to count turns, bumps. But I was small. I forgot. Do you remember the people? Staff. Some. There was a woman with red hair who brought books. A man with a limp who cleaned. And there was one we called the quiet one. He never spoke, just watched us through glass. We used to make jokes that he didn't have a mouth. Nia listened without interrupting. It wasn't a school, Amara said. They taught us but only what we needed, how to sit still, how to serve food, how to smile. Not math. Not history. Just how to be pleasing. Nia felt her stomach tighten. They told us our mothers didn't want us. That we were born broken. But that rich people could fix us. The next day, Nia visited a former journalist friend in the nearby city. She hadn't seen Dahlia in years, not since her own grief had swallowed her social circle. But Dahlia had always been the one person who refused to accept silence. Over coffee, Nia laid out the story. Amara, the DNA results, the pattern of missing children from the rural hospital, and now this so-called House 37. Dahlia paled. I've heard whispers. Years ago. There was talk of an adoption ring. A foundation claiming to place abandoned children with international families. But then it all disappeared. The records were scrubbed. No charges. Just silence. What was the foundation's name? Nia asked. Hope Bridge International, Dahlia said. They closed shop over a decade ago. Their founder vanished. A doctor. Big reputation. Used to speak at pediatric conferences. A name surfaced later that night. Dr. Kweku Elon. The name scraped like a knife across Nia's memory. She had seen it, long ago, scribbled across her own hospital file. He had signed off on the declaration that her child was stillborn. Dahlia dug into her archives. Old scans of pamphlets. A scanned press photo, Dr. Elon shaking hands with a diplomat. A glowing quote about reducing the burden of unwanted children. But then, Nothing. He had vanished after Hope Bridge shut down. The deeper they looked, the darker it got. Hope Bridge had claimed to run mothers' shelters. But there were no testimonies from women who stayed there. No graduates. No social media pages before 2010. Every link circled back to the same generic blurbs and recycled press releases. Dahlia traced bank accounts and found donations from corporations, offshore wires, and, most chillingly, government health contracts from nearly 2 decades ago. It wasn't just an orphanage, she said. It was a marketplace. They trafficked infants. Rebranded birth records. Falsified stillbirths. Mothers like Nia were told their babies had died, while the infants were taken, renamed, and funneled into elite families looking for clean adoptions. Where do you think Amara was headed? Nia asked. She was probably in transit, Dahlia said. Or maybe, rejected. If she fought or if someone changed their mind, they might have left her in the system. Nia's mind reeled. The thought of her daughter passed between strangers like property taught to smile and serve, it boiled something hot in her chest. Amara meanwhile was remembering more. She told Nia about the cold baths. The white rooms. The birthday where they gave her cake but made her sing for it alone in the dark. She remembered being lined up with 3 other girls in matching dresses. Being shown to visitors. She remembered once running away just briefly. They locked her in a small metal room for 2 days with no food, just a radio playing lullabies. Nia took it all in. Each piece like a puzzle of horror. They visited the National Archives together, posing as researchers. There they found an old license under the name Hope Bridge Infant Welfare Shelter. Its address was in a remote part of the north, but the building had since been demolished. A contact in social services told them, off the record, that some adoption files from that region had been sealed, for international diplomacy reasons. How many children? Nia whispered, staring at the redacted papers. No one knows, the contact said. Hundreds maybe. Some never made it into the system. Others were paper-matched to fake deaths. That hospital of yours was mentioned once. What about Dr. Elon? He was last seen in Morocco. But that was 10 years ago. Back home, Amara had started to draw. Her sketches were precise. Rooms, corridors, symbols on walls. Nia pinned them up in her home office. She was building a case now, a file to submit, a folder to present, a truth to expose. She wrote letters to human rights organizations, to legal aid firms, to the press. Some ignored her. Others asked for interviews. She kept a copy of the DNA test taped above her desk. As proof. As reminder. One morning, Amara walked in quietly and pointed to one of the photos Nia had dug up. A press image of Dr. Elon in his white coat. That's the quiet one, she said, her face pale. He shaved his head back then. But that's him. That was all Nia needed. She contacted Dahlia. I want to go public. You're sure? I need others to know. If it happened to me, it happened to more. They might still be out there. And I want to find him. Then we tell the story. A week later, an exposé hit the local papers. The headline read, Stolen at Birth, the mothers who were told to grieve. It featured Nia's voice, Amara's silhouette, and a timeline of Hope Bridge's operation. Dahlia ensured the facts were verified, careful but bold. By evening, emails poured in. Other mothers. Whistleblowers. One woman from another village wrote, I knew something was wrong. My niece gave birth at that same hospital. Same story. Baby died. She never recovered. Another wrote, I worked in one of their shelters. We weren't allowed to speak to the mothers directly. I quit. I always felt sick about it. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a reckoning. And Nia knew, the truth they unearthed together was just the beginning. Because for every Amara who made it back, there were dozens still lost. Dozens still waiting for someone to see them. And she would not stop until they were found. At first, it was just a few names scribbled in the margins of Nia's notebook. First names, mostly, or initials. Women who'd written in after Dahlia's article was published. Women who had whispered their truths in emails and late-night phone calls, who had started their messages with, I don't know if this means anything but, and ended them with, thank you for speaking. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Within weeks, the whispers became a web. A teacher from Port Sula whose baby girl didn't make it after a sudden seizure, though the records were suspiciously vague. A market woman from the south who had twins, but was told only one survived, and who, years later, saw a child with her dead daughter's birthmark on a magazine cover for a political donor's charity gala. A quiet seamstress from the hill country who had never told anyone her baby had been taken from her arms before she even got to hold him. Stillborn, they said. malformed. But she always remembered the silence in the room, not grief, not pity. Efficiency. They met in small cafes and borrowed office rooms. Some brought yellowed hospital papers. Others brought the clothes they had packed for babies they never got to dress. One woman clutched a knitted cap with her daughter's name stitched into it, threadbare but still soft. They called themselves the Mothers Who Remember. They were not an organization. They had no funding, no formal structure. Just grief, memory, and now one another. Nia became the natural center, not the leader but the link. She listened to every story, cross-checked timelines, plotted hospitals and birth centers on maps. She began creating a database protected by passwords, where they could store copies of whatever fragments they had. Names of doctors, nurses, addresses, unexplained birth and death records, receipts from donations to Hope Bridge. There was one woman named Rahima who had been a nurse for only 3 months in 2009. She remembered the way some charts were pulled aside at night. Special files, they were called. She had once walked into a room and seen a woman screaming for her child while a doctor quietly folded a white blanket in another room. She was told not to return after her probationary period. We were told it was charity, she said, that the babies were being saved, sent abroad, given better lives. But we weren't allowed to ask. I still see their faces. Another mother, Ife, had tried to take legal action years ago. She was laughed out of the police station. What court will entertain a woman who says ghosts took her baby? They mocked. Now for the first time she wasn't alone. They gathered photos of missing children, sketched memories of nurses, compared forms and found details that matched. The same signature from a Dr. Elon. The same discharge code. The same rubber stamp from a clinic in Banya that closed mysteriously in 2011. One mother, Miriam, had a copy of her stillbirth certificate, but in tiny font at the bottom, barely legible, it read, "Infant not viewed by family. Removed per Protocol 6B. Protocol 6B. It appeared in 5 other documents from different years, different hospitals. No one could find a full description of what it meant. They submitted it to a legal advisor, a former prosecutor who'd worked on trafficking cases. She paled when she saw it. This is a red flag. That code, 6B, it's not a standard protocol. If it was internal, it may have been part of a hidden policy. Hidden policy. Sanitized words for theft. Together, they filed an official petition to the Department of Health and Social Services. With it, they submitted over 150 pages of testimonies, photos, and timeline alignments. They demanded an inquiry. The department sent back a single-page response. We are reviewing the documents submitted. At this time, no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing has been determined. But the mothers didn't stop. They began naming names. Some risked their anonymity. A few went on radio interviews. Others gave written statements. Dahlia published follow-ups with titles like Born But Not Brought Home and The Blank Spaces in the Registry. And then came a breakthrough. A woman named Kesa, now living abroad, contacted Nia after reading an article online. She had been adopted as an infant, raised in the UK, always told her mother had died giving birth. But as she grew older, her paperwork seemed off. Her adoption file was heavily redacted. Her birth country listed only as West Africa, with no hospital name. She shared a photo of herself as a baby. One of the mothers, Halima, nearly fainted. That's my child. A DNA test confirmed it. 18 years apart. A mother and daughter reunited. They had no shared language at first, but they had the same smile. Nia cried for hours the night that happened. It was hope. Solid, tangible hope. There were others too. One boy, now 17, stumbled onto an article and saw a name he'd heard in a dream. He had always felt out of place in his foster home, where affection was conditional and discipline was rigid. His birth name had been changed. But when he saw a photo of his mother in the article, her eyes, her jaw, he couldn't look away. He was scared to reach out. But he did. And the pattern became undeniable. Hope Bridge had been the center. But there were many spokes, hospitals, clinics, health boards, social workers. All part of a system that had stolen infants and buried their pasts in paperwork and lies. Some of the children were never adopted. Some were trafficked to private estates. Some lived under new names in cities far away. Some, no one knew. But now the mothers knew the truth. Not just in pieces. In full. They had names. They had patterns. They had each other. They still wept. They still grieved. But now they moved together, not as victims but as a force. They organized a vigil at the Capitol steps. Each woman carried a candle. Each candle bore the name of a child lost. Some had real names. Some had only nicknames: Peanut, Butterfly, Star. They lit them all the same. Nia stood at the front, Amara beside her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The flame in her hand said enough. They were the mothers who remembered. And now the world would too. Asked ChatGPT. The house felt warmer now. Lived in. Not because the furniture had changed or the paint on the walls had been refreshed, but because laughter filled it again, clumsy, uncertain, but real. Nia would wake up to the sound of Amara humming in the kitchen, making tea she'd never quite get right, and smile before her eyes even opened. They were strangers still in some ways, bonded not by shared years but by something older, a promise broken, now mended thread by thread. Amara was learning slowly. The rhythms of this place. The feel of her real name when spoken without fear. She called Nia Mama, sometimes awkwardly like trying on shoes just slightly too big, but with pride. Nia never corrected her. She never needed to. On Amara's 19th birthday they didn't throw a party. They planted a tree. Nia had suggested it quietly one evening while they folded laundry. Something that grows, she said. Not to mark what was lost but what's still to come. Amara had nodded, tears gathering in her eyes, then asked, "Can we make it a naming tree?" So on the morning of her birthday, they walked to a quiet clearing just outside the town, a place once used for forgotten things. Nia carried a small sapling in a clay pot. Amara carried a name. Not the name printed on her falsified birth certificate. Not the name she'd been called in the homes that passed her around like a package. But the name Nia had whispered in her hospital bed, the one no one else had ever been allowed to say aloud. Adana. Daughter of her mother. She spoke it softly as she placed the tag at the base of the tree. Her voice didn't tremble. The earth felt solid beneath her feet. From that day forward, she told everyone, "Call me Adana." It was more than a declaration. It was reclamation. Word spread of the tree. Some mothers came to leave notes under its roots. Others brought flowers, scraps of baby blankets, old hospital bracelets. A quiet shrine grew, not one of grief but of names once silenced, now spoken. And the reunions didn't stop. Another girl found her mother in the north. A boy who had always wondered about the scar on his shoulder learned it came from his twin brother pulling too hard in the womb. A brother he hadn't known existed until the mother's network found the paperwork that proved he wasn't an only child. They came slowly in waves. Some came back ready. Some came with fear. All of them were welcomed. 6 months later, a small ceremony was held at the old hospital, now decommissioned, its wings hollowed out, echoing with disuse. Journalists attended. So did midwives, former nurses, even a few city officials who once claimed no knowledge of the truth. A bronze plaque was mounted on the front wall, just below the cracked stone of the original entryway. The engraving was simple. For the children who vanished. For the mothers who never stopped listening. May no name be erased again. Nia traced the words with her fingers. Adana stood beside her, hand resting gently on her back. There were no speeches. No one needed them. The silence was enough, the right kind this time. Later, back home, they sat together on the porch. Adana leaned her head on Nia's shoulder, eyes closed. The sky was deepening to dusk, the wind soft through the trees. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Adana asked. Nia thought for a long time. "No," she said finally. "I used to wish that. But now, I don't want to lose what we've built. Even if it came late." Adana smiled. "Me too." A moth fluttered past, landing briefly on the windowsill before disappearing into the night. Their past was still out there, scattered, bruised, incomplete. But the future? It had a name now. And it would never be taken again. Asked ChatGPT.